Good afternoon. This is Dr. Craig Stern of Pharma Pharmaceutical Consultants and ProData Analytics. I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to you. I was kind of debating about different things to talk about today, but my staff felt that because there's so much discussion going on about the Affordable Care Act, that we should talk about fundamentals. I want to put this discussion in the context that we're not going to talk about politics because that tends to confuse everything. So let me talk about some fundamental parts of what's going on with both the Affordable Care Act and healthcare, and talk about those areas that may or may not have some impact and change and what those kind of changes will require. Let me start with perhaps the most controversial part of it, and that's the guaranteed issue, which says that everyone has to have insurance. This, of course, is a very common thing in other countries where the federal governments in those countries pay for everyone to have health care. The issue is driven actually by a mathematical issue, and that's the law of large numbers, which, to make it overly simplistic, if I may, is that you need a lot of people who are buying insurance and are in the market so that those people who are actually utilizing have a big enough pool of money in order to pay for all of that. That tends to drive a good deal of what goes on, and clearly has been an issue politically as to how you get everyone included. The bigger problems that have occurred in the Affordable Care Act is that younger people have a particular penalty if they don't participate, but the penalty that was set, while it was probably set at a given rate and thought to be appropriate, in fact is too low. So people are opting out of being involved in the Affordable Care Act and just buying insurance separately. One of the options that people have talked about is to increase that penalty so that everybody has to participate. But it leads to another problem, and the other problem is that there isn't a appropriate insurance design that works for individuals. We're dealing with groups, and especially many of those insurance companies that opted out of the Affordable Care Act, who were experts in what to do in group health when there was groups of people involved. The individuals was more of a Blue Cross, Blue Shield kind of situation where people were involved in these programs as individuals, and they were getting benefits because of tax exemptions from the federal government. It was thought, I'm sure at the time, that the tax exemptions in the Affordable Care Act would do the trick in that regard, but clearly it hasn't. So as a result of that, there's been a lot of discussion about trying to find ways to build a plan that young people can use, because in general, young people don't use healthcare. The greatest uses of healthcare, and probably the 20 to 45-year-old, is really a birth of babies for them, and those are mostly hospital charges, effectively not making a huge impact on what goes on with the rest of the healthcare system. There has been a significant talk about having insurance being sold across state boundaries so that people could participate in other plans, and that probably has some benefit, especially in those plans that have savings accounts and others where people can buy into a plan where they buy a catastrophic benefit for a couple $1,000s, and then they pay out of the savings account for their care. They're also heavily involved in deciding what care they actually need, what care they don't need, so that they're more involved in what's going on in healthcare. The problem for that will still be, are there enough members, as we talk about from the law of large numbers, in order to build a large enough group of people to make that viable. But either way, there are multiple options that are talked about in order to try and get a health plan that fits for young people who don't use much care, but still need to be in the overall pot, so that their money is going in and paying for those people that use more of the care. There's also a need, of course, in order to try and understand where this care is occurring. Is it just occurring in hospitals? Is it occurring in ambulatory? And clearly with the new moves in specialty medicines that are now challenging the cost of hospital care and potentially greater than hospital care, that there's going to be a real question about where is that money going, how is it being applied, and how do you get enough people involved in the process. Another question that's come up is young people being involved in their own family's care up to age 26, which in general is a move to try and include them before they have their first jobs, or even in their first jobs where they don't have a lot of healthcare insurance, so that they can be included in the pool with marginal increases in the cost for what goes on in a family and how they're addressed with that. I don't know that that will have a great deal of debate, but either way the question will be, how will you handle those people, and will they be thrown in the pot with other young people that need to have a plan that doesn't cost very much because they don't use much, versus being a marginal increase in what goes on in the overall care from their families. Another part of this is finance. And finance is a big deal, not just because of the Affordable Care Act, but because a good deal of the care is still being provided by hospitals. Approximately 80% of all hospitals in the United States are 200 beds or less, and many of them are regional hospitals. These hospitals are getting a good deal of their income right now from the Affordable Care Act through grants that gives them that money. If that money is taken away, then the question will be, how are these people going to support the care that they're giving, especially in regional care? And that will be a major concern as people try and decide, how do you distribute the money, and where does this money go in order to deal with that volume of hospitals that are being taken care of. The other issue is pre-existing illness, and that was brought up with the Affordable Care Act, and that was for people, both young people and older people, who had a pre-existing illness and either found that they couldn't get insurance, or that insurance was prohibitively expensive because of their pre-existing disease. This will be a problem for everyone, and clearly is an issue because it leads to a significant use of emergency rooms, urgent care as the more expensive locations of care, versus having some sort of regular ambulatory review by their physicians in order to control that. That is a significant problem. It's part of the whole argument of prevention and trying to deal with prevention and stabilization of disease so that people will be able to continue to get care, and removing that from the Affordable Care Act, or removing it entirely, will be a major burden on trying to figure out how to deal with those people, and how are those people going to get care in a reasonable way. The other issue that we have to deal with is volume to value. This whole issue of the Affordable Care Act had as one of its issues that it was going to stop paying eventually for the volume of care that was done by physicians, hospitals, and others, and move to more of the value and whether that value was involved. It's of interest that the entire industry has begun to move in that direction. So both hospitals, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and others have all begun to move to, how do you demonstrate the value? And while there's multiple arguments about what value really is, the bottom line is that there are measures that can be used. Clearly there's going to be debate about those measures and how it's done, but pardon me, the real question that's going to occur is, how do you address paying for something that actually works and has value versus drugs that have marginal benefits over one and another, surgeries that have benefits over one and another, etc. That is a major shift. The shift is already going on in the industry, and the question will be, what will happen if things are removed, because the industry has already moved significantly in that direction to address that. The other issue that I want to bring up is that essential healthcare benefits were included in the Affordable Care Act as part of the prevention mechanism that I talked about with trying to deal with multiple issues, pre-existing disease and otherwise. The prevention issue is a very clear demonstration of trying to control overall care, overall cost, and that it's cheaper to deal with preventing something versus treating it. That will also be a concern as we try and go down this road of what we do. I hope this has given a little bit of clarification of areas that we think are going to be key as people go down this discussion. Irregardless of where they are or where anyone is politically, they're going to have to address these issues and decide how they want to handle them. Please consider taking a look at our pharmacy benefit news that we put out as a free publication every 2 weeks to discuss a host of different issues, both clinical and financial, as well as to go to www.profarmaconsultants.com/rxinfox.html in order to see some of our information that is news and looking at the news that is current and of interest. Thanks so much. Have a great week, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week.